Welcome to Back to the Roots podcast. This is Brian Wood, and today Mike Kline and myself are sitting down with Tim and Katie Kline, who are organic dairy farmers in Holmes County, Ohio. And Katie has been on the podcast before in our, I think it was our fourth episode, giving the perspective of women on the farm. And today we wanted to sit down with the two of you guys to get a little bit more of a perspective of how a Amish couple dynamic of farming together, just to give a little better picture of how that looks. But before we get into all those details, let's just start with a background of your farming career, because I guess it's not exactly been all on this farm, and that's kind of where we wanted to start. Let's just start with some background.
We got married in 97, and we bought a farm, our neighboring farm, from my dad's farm, which I grew up on, spent most of my life there. And we started farming in 97. We were married in May, and then started that fall. We got 40 cows, and we started shipping milk. We were there for about 8 years, and from there we moved to Kansas, which is where my wife was from, and moved to her home farm. We were there for 3 years and realized that unless you grow up in an environment where you have crop loss and hail and extreme weather conditions, I didn't adapt to it at all. So we had a farm come up for rent here back in Ohio. So we moved back to Ohio in 2009 and moved to the farm where we are at present. We transitioned as soon as we moved here, and we were fortunate enough to be added to the truck route in March of 2012.
How many kids do you have?
We have 4. And I think Katie could give the ages and then the birth dates better than I can.
Probably.
Ryan was born in October of 99, Aaron in August of 2001, Demi in December of 2003, and Kara in June of 09. So
Kara was born right when
in
you moved
Kansas.
in. Oh, she was born in Kansas.
She was born
and moved
in Kansas, yes.
She's the one Jayhawk. But like I always accuse them out there is no such thing as a Jayhawk. That's made up anyway.
So when you moved from the original farm, which, to back up a little bit, you guys got married in Kansas, then moved back to Ohio to farm.
Yes.
When you moved back in there, was organics wasn't going yet in 97 here as far as a route. That didn't start until 03. Were you transitioning that farm to organics before you moved back to Kansas?
No, we never did transition, and I'm not exactly sure why, because I think we might have used herbicides. I can remember the last time we used herbicides on corn, we used Prowl, and everything turned green. The Prowl is a greenish colored spray, and I can remember spraying the corn 1 year, maybe 2 years, and from that point on, we would not have used any fertilizers or sprays, chemical sprays, but we would have used some antibiotics, and we used back then already chicken litter for our fertility. An interesting thing when we first started milking, of course it was just the two of us, and I can remember so well, Ryan was he wasn't very old. As soon as he could handle sitting in a backpack, Katie would be milking with him on her back. So, he was there from day one, and if he got irritable, all we had to do is set him on the bulk tank, and the sound of the agitator mower would calm him down, because that was the sound he heard so much of.
And with the way the barn was situated there, they could run along they could see the heads of the cows. And so by the time he was 3, he knew all the names of the 40 cows, because 3-year-olds, they keep asking, so, well, what's this one? What's this one? And he memorized them all. So that was pretty awesome.
And one thing I've observed with especially in the Plain community, is that milking time is also family time. Basically, it's the time when, the husband and wife and then the kids get a chance to share things. Is that kind of how the dynamic works here as well?
It does. It does.
I don't think I've been trying to think of an instance of a successful dairy farmer without the wife involved, and I'm still struggling on that one. Because, when we say family farm, there are different definitions depending who you talk to, but primarily the labor is all family. So especially when we were young married with small children, Katie was extremely vital just to get the things done. And I might be in the field all day, but during milking time, we would be able to catch up and see what all went about during the day. But we also are very fortunate. We get to spend, now that the children are older, not as much, but it used to be we would spend 3 meals a day together. So we did not have to have special little outings or just to be able to reconnect. We were with each other all the time.
And I think in the small family farm like your family, you have no choice but to have the kids in the barn to milk.
Right.
There is no older sibling to watch them in the house. There's no babysitter. So the kids grow up being out in the barn, so they see how the family unit works together, which I think is, I love when you walk into a barn and there's a kid in either a stroller or something in a milking barn, which to a lot of people that don't understand farming, oh my goodness, in that dirty environment, you're having a kid, there's probably no allergies in the kids too.
No, I wouldn't think so. Kara's I think one of her earliest memories here is sitting in one of those calf feeders down in the parlor pit. That's where she would wake up by the time we wanted to go milking. We'd take her out there and put a blanket down, and it was big enough she could lie down, and yeah, it was very comfortable for her, and she was right there with us. So.
And if you look at all the years that we've been married, even through 4 small children, there were times when, right after they were born, if they were sleeping, Katie would come out and just sit there and visit while milking. It was just, and even today, I'm guessing there could be argument for that the children should be in the parlor more, but we enjoy spending that time together so much that the two of us still do the bulk of the milking. Ryan actually made an interesting comment. Demi and him were talking, and if they're feeding the calves, they can hear us visiting. And Demi said, yeah, she likes to slide down the hay chute and just sit there real quiet and see what our conversation is about. So I don't think we're quite aware of how well our conversation carries. But it just, on a dairy farm like this, the parlor is a focal point. At 4:30, from 4:30 to 5:30 every night and every morning, if you need to find somebody, there will always be somebody there. So it's a very vital part of the family, not just the farm.
And what kind of milking setup do you have? Do you have a flat parlor or a tie stall or stanchion, or what is it?
We have a raised parlor, a swing 6.
Okay.
So we have 6 on a side with 6 units. We started out with a flat barn with 6 on a side, and then when we moved to Kansas, we put in a parlor, and then we moved back here, and we went back to a parlor. So,
well, the reason I ask is because we've had some, advisors come out to different farms on how to improve cow flow and how to improve efficiencies on the farm. And I've had the comment from some of the guys that milk in tie stalls say, well, what am I supposed to do with the kids? This is where the kids play. This is a spot for the children to come. And like you said, it's a focal point of the farm. And even though they might be able to milk more cows per hour or whatever the efficiency rate is, they're not willing to change their setup in order to, it's something that the family loves and enjoys, and they're not going to change it for that reason.
And that was the nicest thing about the flat barn, was the kids had area to play and things like that. But I guess the smallest one, since we had the parlor now, our baby's 10 now, so of course she's not doing that anymore. But the smallest one would always ride in a backpack when we were milking, so she'd always be right there with us, and learning every day without us even saying anything. I think that's the greatest thing, is they learn without us telling them step by step, this is what you do. And so
they learn from observing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, at what age do you start giving the children responsibilities like feeding calves, or did that start with Ryan pretty early on?
3, 4, something like that.
I know in Kansas, of course, here we farm with horses, but out there we farm with tractor. And he mowed all my hay at 6 years old. Now, if you would talk to our 2 oldest, they would say they had to do 3 times as much as the younger ones. And they probably have an argument because it was necessity. Like Erin, she was the oldest of the 3 girls, and at an extremely young age, she was doing things that were, if now looking back, are pretty amazing.
But she was very capable.
She was capable, and the need was there. It was just needed.
But because the kids are involved from that early age on, it's not looked at as drudgery or work. It is a part of the operation.
Right.
So to get children to do it from an early age, it would never work if you took a kid that wasn't around and involved in everything that was going on leading up to that age. So you're prepping them for that from as soon as they're in a backpack.
From the start, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, like for instance, right now, Ryan, of course, works at the feed mill, but he will do the feeding in the morning and feeding at night. Erin will do the horses. Demi will feed older heifers, and she's got a couple of rabbits, and then she'll come in and help with the milking. Then Kara will fill water troughs, take care of the chickens. Everybody has their specific thing, and it's always interesting to me. They just realize that if everybody digs in, it will save time for everybody. So everybody there's every morning and every night there's really no instructions given unless there's a feed change, but everybody automatically knows what their part of their chores are.
And they really have a good feeling about a job well done. They know how to do everything, and it works well.
You really notice the different talents in the different children, how different they are. Demi's just, she's I almost call her an animal whisperer, but as far as calves, she'll see that they're a little under the weather before the calves are even aware of it. She's just, it's just watching her observe. We have one problem, that the heifers are so tame when it comes to breaking for milking. It's tough because you can walk up to them all. She tames them too much, if there's such a thing, almost.
And there is. They're a pain to get in the parlor then.
You try to squeeze them in between 2 older cows.
Yeah, that's what you have to do. But you can't spook them. You can't get them to hurry.
So I want to go back a little bit on the decision to go back to Kansas. Now, that was, I'm sure, not an easy decision, or the move back here after Kansas. What kind of led to you exploring moving to Kansas, and then what brought you back here? You said you were not conducive to crop failure and drought, and also 80-mile-an-hour winds every day. That would drive me.
Not every day.
Okay. I remember when you lived out there, Tim, you called me and you said, there's actually no wind today, but it's 98 degrees. The only time the wind slows down is when it's over 90.
Tim's favorite thing is wearing gloves to put the hitch pins in, because they were so hot. He couldn't.
Are you serious?
Yeah, we were the first year. The first year we were out there, we got to experience one of the worst years they had. We had 40 straight days over 100. Well, our corn, in the morning, here's the thing that really affected me was at 4:30 in the morning, it was 85 or 90 degrees, and the cows had their tongue out, were panting, and there was nothing you could do for it. And our corn burned up because it was dry too. And then when we were chopping that burned up corn, we had to wear gloves because the drawbars and the hitch pins and anything steel was too hot to touch with the bare hand.
It's crazy.
But what led us out there, part of it was we moved on to that farm adjoining Dad's, and that was an extremely fertile farm from day one. Naturally drained. It had extremely high quality. And the previous tenant that was farming it for probably the last 10 years had no weed control, but he continued to put fertility on. But he got no crops because the weeds suffocated it. Well, what happened was he was putting things, nutrients into the soil, but getting nothing out because he was getting no harvesting no crops. So we moved on there with cows, and it hadn't seen animal manure in, I don't know, I would have to say 30 years. And when we put the cow manure on there, the neighbors couldn't believe the crops that it was the missing ingredient. It is just exploded. And weed control was never that big of an issue. I think it created a balance that hadn't been there previously. And in that period of time, I look back on that, and there was very little that I tried that didn't work. So I had this all figured out. So when we were asked if we would consider moving to Katie's home farm in Kansas, I was like, yeah, And, I grew up farming with horses, and being able to just fire up the tractor, this sounded appealing. We were dealing with 200 acres, a lot of acres. And this, and this goes with anybody that moves. There's that sense of adventure. We can all say, all these other reasons, but when it comes down to it, the idea of the adventure is pretty attractive. So when we did move out there, that's when I learned compassion, because when all of a sudden you're dealing with weather and different soils, and all of a sudden you try things and it just doesn't work. And that's when I became aware of the fact that it's not as easy as what I thought it was. But then
there's a reason land is cheaper in Kansas.
That's right. And there's some irrigation going on, but the water table's dropping so fast where you can't hardly get water rights. And then I'm always very happy that we didn't burn all the bridges when we left. So there was one that we could get across coming back. And then when we found this farm, it was just...
That's still how you found this farm was kind of amazing because...
Not just kind of.
Yeah.
It was totally amazing, really.
Because, when you look at the value of land, the 84 acres sold last week down about 10 miles from here brought $54,000 something per acre. And for you to find a 160-acre farm in central Ohio to even rent... was pretty amazing. And the whirlwind of moving back in here, was it harder or easier moving out or in? Or was it basically no difference?
Not a lot of difference, but we brought more in than we took out. We went out with 3 semis and came back with 5, something like that. Moving a farm is not something you'd want to do every year.
Our cows have traveled more than some people have, but we took the same cows out and ended up bringing most of them back.
Well, and people would say, well, why didn't you just get cows there? And I said, well, they have to come from somewhere. They can't, they're not going to be there at the farm, so you have to get cows somewhere. Might as well take our own.
But to move and then have a new herd of cows yet to boot would be... At least you've got that one constant of the same animals.
That's true.
It takes the cows from 3 to 5 years. When we moved to Kansas, I felt it was 3 years until they really started doing well. Here it took almost 5 years for them to acclimate to the different soil types, the different mineralization, till they finally, for the first 3 years, if they got out of the fence, they would take off down the road because it wasn't home to them. But now...
That has since changed.
Now they'll just stir up the yard and the garden. Mm-hmm. As for your question about, moving out, or there was joy or excitement both directions. Moving back to Ohio... you have to remember, neither one of us had ever seen this place. Prior to, of course, I came in and you were involved with helping with the parlor, but Katie and the children had only seen pictures of this farm prior to pulling in and unloading furniture.
So, Katie, you never saw the farm before you moved back?
No. I didn't.
Wow. You have that much faith in Tim.
I love Ohio.
Okay.
Sorry, that should probably not be in there. But yeah, it was a joint decision. It really was. It was a totally joint decision both ways. We were both agreed we wanted to try Kansas, and Kansas wasn't for us. And so we were both very much in agreement that we should come here. We have this opportunity, and we should come here and be here. So we've lived here longer than we have on any other place.
So it'd be 9 years this year?
It was 9 in January.
We're starting this is our 10th growing season.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were on the first farm for 8, you said? And in Kansas for 3?
3. Mm-hmm.
Oh, this makes me tired just thinking. The
these-
thought of moving once is horrible.
We filled a big dumpster every time.
That is the one nice thing about moving. It really helps you clean up clutter really in a hurry.
You find things you don't need.
Exactly. Yep.
I've actually got a whole shed full of that. I might need that sometime if I were to ever move. Go
Right.
on.
Yep.
Well, part of it was, and then we were here for 2 years, and our landlord he was ecstatic. When we moved here, he had somebody renting the house, somebody renting the barn, and somebody renting the fields. And the last years, I think he retired in the 90s is when he sold they were a conventional dairy farm. But the last, I don't know how many years of farming he used, no pesticides or chemicals. This was even before organic. He used pelletized chicken manure for his fertilizer. So when he heard that we were going to transition to organic, he was ecstatic, because finding somebody with the same mindset that he had was a rarity. And I think we were here for 2 years, and we talked about changing the siding on the house or something of that nature. And he said, why don't I just sell it to you guys? I want to sell it to you like you were my son. And that was primarily because he knew Dad's philosophy on farming, but he also saw what we were doing, and he liked the idea of keeping it a farm. And then they left a lot of money on the table to see it be a farm.
They did. It was absolutely amazing. It was. And still is. I'm still in awe that this actually happened, really.
I don't think I've heard of farm story that you can think was more meant to be than everything that came together here. From finding it while you were living in Kansas, through a friend who heard from people, through people, about people.
And it wasn't even about this farm.
Oh, it wasn't?
No, it was about the farm down on 189.
Oh.
Is what he was talking about.
The home farm.
The home farm.
Okay.
And then I talked to Dad about it. He said, what about the Mackey place? The earlier owners were the Mackeys. So to everybody in the area, this is the Mackey farm.
And, oh yeah, it was awesome.
But all of this, when you talk about moving a farm and getting another one started up, it takes a lot of energy. And I can assure you that I could not do this again. I don't think I would have the energy to do it, because it takes, and without the full family support, as we're trying to, get everything running smoothly, without doing it by yourself, without wife and children actively involved, I won't say it's not doable, but
for
it would
this
be
amount,
very, very
for
difficult.
this amount of animals, this amount of land, it would be really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So would you say that the farm is now really rocking and rolling? After being here this is your 10th growing season, from when you got here to where it is today, have you noticed a difference?
Black and white
Sure.
type of difference?
Yeah.
It is huge. It is. I will never have it where I'd want it to be, which I think every successful farmer will say that. You're always striving to do better. But if I look at my soils versus 10 years ago, we have to remember, I can remember what we were here, I think our second or third year, I don't remember exactly, but we were out there and we found dung beetles. And there had never, ever been any livestock on this hillside, unless the cows got out. It was always cropped. So
And it was a conventional farm, soybeans and corn, basically.
Right. The last 10
here.
years, it was just rented out as corn and beans. So the dung beetle was just another, at that point, any little improvement was met with a lot of excitement. But now if you go out there, I can remember working the soil to get ready for planting, and it was a battle. Now it's
Well, I had
so
to
much more
smile
mellow.
when I watched you and Ryan when you were plowing, and you'd plow and the furrows would just, they flopped over really nicely. And I think it was the second year we were here, and you were trying to plow this one field, and they would just flop right. He'd plow, and they'd just flop right back in.
right side up.
Because the hillside is steep
Yes.
to boot.
Right.
And Tim would be out there trying with his hands, to get this soil or this sod to move, and it was just there was just no life there.
Wasn't. And the earthworms were the
Earthworms, we
the
noticed.
people that show up in Florida in February from the north, real pale and kind of scrawny looking.
And there were very few though, and I think.
Yes, there were.
But then by about the third, fourth year, we started seeing more earthworms, and just the revitalization of the land has just been so much. There's so many rewards.
And it's nothing fancy. It's just good, solid, rotations with animals involved, and the soil has amazing capabilities of healing if you allow it to.
Yesterday, when we stopped in and Brian wanted to fit some ground with 6 horses,
I wouldn't say wanted to. I had the chance to.
he had the chance and he took it. So I've got some really good pictures of how to not do it. No, kidding, Brian. When we looked down the field, we weren't sure, was there a drunk person or was that just the way the horses walked, because it wasn't very straight, which I thought was funny. But I know for somebody that never probably drove horses, you want to overcorrect. And then you get the weave going, which is normal. But what I wanted to say, I was so excited because I walked across the field where he was in the field. I was taking some pictures, and I found the nicest arrowhead that I have ever found in my life. The first actual arrowhead.
Complete.
It's got one little chip off the one corner, but I had never found one before. To think that the last person on this land that touched it was probably an Indian. And then I told my son about it, and he said, well, probably somebody picked it up and saw it was chipped and threw it back in the field. I'm like, come on, let me have my moment of glory here. But that to me is just what you've done with this farm has been really exciting. But what's even more exciting is to see what it's doing with the family structure, what it's doing in the community, because the community starts in the small setting of the farm and the family, and then it grows from there. You can't have you do your own thing and be a part of a community. You've got to have, it takes a community to raise your children, but in the setting that you have, I think is just the absolute perfect scenario. Because I'm sure the kids don't look at farming negatively. No. Because you're also making enough money to take some vacations and stuff, because if you don't have enough money to do some of that stuff, kids won't have an interest.
Right.
And when I see the involvement of the kids, they're teenagers. I'm sure there's times when they think it's absolutely horrible that they have to work. Wow.
I don't know.
They did a better job of raising kids than I did.
Maybe Erin, if it cuts into her
volleyball
schedule. But other than that, it's not a.
But I've been very fortunate. We grew up, as well as I do, that work was not viewed as drudgery. And I'm really struggling these days where work is viewed as negative. Why is anything that you're doing outside, take for example plowing. I love to plow. I actually don't view it as work. Now when it's 18 degrees in the morning and nice stiff wind blowing out, then it might qualify. But if you don't, and I think I can honestly say I've made a conscious effort, or tried to over the years, not to view work as drudgery. Because as long as somebody is capable and willing to work, he will always be okay. And you mentioned about the importance of the family farm. And I think if we lose our agriculture, our farming in the community, our way of life is in jeopardy. Mm-hmm. And if you look at our forefathers that made decisions that allow us to have what we have today, they did not take the easy route every time. They made decisions based on what's good for the next generations. And if we're not willing to give up anything, then we'll more than likely not leave anything back.
But that's where Organic Valley has been so extremely crucial, because so many of the even the local dairy plants aren't accepting, any milk conventionally even. Mm-hmm. And so getting a much better price for your milk makes a big impact.
I think the pricing allows for profit to be there.
Right.
Which allows, no matter how much you love what you do, if there isn't some money there, it's then
even
just
some money
hobby.
For improvement.
Right, exactly. And so I think what you were saying about work, Tim, is that part of the reason why work may not be looked at as drudgery is because, well, first of all, you've, like you said, in the 10 years on this farm, you've seen drastic changes. So I'm sure that's got to be fun. That's got to be fun to watch that. And then on top of that, you have a family that is willing to help out and be a part of the operation. And then on top of that, you're making enough money to survive and probably beyond that, not just survive, but be willing to able to support a family and go on vacations now and then and that kind of stuff. So all that adds up to enjoying your work, whereas too many people just look at a job as a job. I have to go into work today, and it's not something they enjoy. They may not see progress. They're just there to produce a widget
and draw a paycheck.
Yep.
So yesterday, how did you feel when you were in the field there? I just had to think to myself, Tim said you had to hang on to the bar. And that's what our children do. They ride along and they learn that motion as they grow up. And so they have that down pat by the time they drive the team by themselves.
Yeah, the girls really made fun of. They laughed when they heard what I said because they didn't even having those sea legs or whatever to the rocky motion. They grew up with it.
When I rode with you, Brian, the one thing which I haven't driven a team of horses in a long time, but I could feel the horses slowing down, and without realizing, I had braced myself for that, but because I just knew the sound of what it sounds like when the horses slow down, and Brian didn't. So when they all of a sudden stopped, he lost it. But it's impossible to tell somebody, well, when you hear this, the horses. It's not. If you grow up with it, like I just thought of that after it happened. Like, I have no idea how to explain what that sounds like.
Well, and that was the fun part about you guys kind of were off to the side just in case, but just being up there doing it, and you eventually, it would have taken me longer, but I would have eventually I was starting to get my legs underneath me. And one of the things when I took the first round with you, Tim, was, you said you kind of can pull back if you feel you're losing balance, pull back on the reins rather than grab the bar. Well, I started doing that, and that's why the horses were stopping, because I kept on pulling back.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that. It's something learned, and then Mike said he found an arrowhead, and Tim, you were saying you were kind of watching for arrowheads, and I was thinking, boy, it would be kind of neat to be able to look down and see if I can see an arrowhead. And I'd look down and I'm like, no, I can't do that. I'm gonna fall down if I do that.
But I think just making those couple rounds yesterday made me realize how much effort and the work that it takes in with horse farming especially, to plow, fit ground, plant, and raise an organic row crop. Okay? It is, for you, weed control isn't really that big of an issue, but the amount of dedication and work that goes in, what is that, a 10-acre field, 8 acres? 7-acre field. The amount of work that goes in to raise that crop organically, doing it with horses, lots of times I completely forget the challenges and the amount of effort that it takes to get it done until you make one round and you think of the 30-foot field cultivator coming in and in 20 minutes being done. It's a different thing, and Brian, you mentioned yesterday if you see something 3 times, you stop noticing it. And I think that's what's happening. And to have Brian come in to this region and do something like this makes me see the things that I see all the time and don't think are that great.
That's why when we're making every pass with horses takes time. Every time you go make a pass over the field. So that's why we are so concerned to make every pass count, because it's so much, for a field like that, if I don't do a good job going over once and I have to do it again, it'll take me 2-3 hours to go over it again. So I want to try and go in when the conditions are just perfect. So everything, do it with the minimal amount of passes.
But I grew up with tractors, and so there was never any resting, of course. So what's heartwarming to me is seeing when they're out in the field and there's 2 of them plowing, and of course they just have the one bottom, which was mind-numbing to me to start with. One bottom. Wow, you're going to get a lot done today. And so there's 2 of them, and they're plowing. And every round they'll stop at the end of the field and they'll just sit there and they'll just chat and just have all kinds of interesting conversations. Or Tim's out here in this field, and he'll come up and he'll rest, and we'll all just sit there and have a bit of a coffee break. And I really like that. I've decided that's so much better than I guess hearing the tractor sounds all day.
Well, one of the things when we talked with Wendell Berry was that he said one of the problems in agriculture is the eyes to acres ratio is out of balance. And Tim, you mentioned earlier that some of the forefathers had made decisions that wasn't always the easiest route. And farming with horses probably isn't the easiest route compared to tractors some of the time. But that keeps that eyes to acres ratio in balance and keeps the farm small and allows for the coffee breaks and the family time and the 2 people sitting there resting horses and having a conversation. Because, I mean, as you well know, with farming with tractors, you just go, and
right.
You just hear the rumble of the diesel.
And they have to stop at noon because the horses have to rest. So
you might mention that what Ryan told you when you asked him if he isn't tired of plowing, because we've been going at it day after day, and you asked him. Do you remember that?
I don't. Was it?
You
just
asked
this
him,
year?
Ryan, don't you get tired of plowing? He said, "Oh, Mom, you never get tired of plowing." He said, when he helps the neighbor with the tractor, he said, I just hate it, because he said, what I cherish is going out there with horses is the conversations at the end of the field. And, especially I think we can say in this day and age with the high rate of life is so fast. Everything's in the expressway. And,
even for us sometimes.
Even for the plain communities, everything's sped up so drastically, and the time for just actual conversation doesn't happen enough anymore.
Well, I remember as a kid when you would rest the horses when the hawks and stuff were migrating north, you'd have binoculars and lay on your back at the end of the field and stare at the sky looking for hawks that were flying over migrating north. It's the things like that, and hearing a bird sing that you get with horse farm, you are much more in tune with nature. Because if you have a 100 horsepower tractor going, you're not going to hear anything, because you're probably going to have ear protection in unless you have a cab, so you won't hear that. And that's where it takes a family and it takes a community to do it this way. If you were here by yourself, no kids, no wife, you couldn't do this.
No.
So it takes a concerted effort as a unit to make it work to do it this way.
And it's the same way with the community. Community is people. It's not things. And when on the family farm, we all work together, and if a community all works together, it ends up with the same results. You were talking about laying on your back. Remember the first eagle that we ever saw over the home farm? We had a bird list of all the different birds, and I think we were thrashing oats, and it was a clear blue sky in the summer, and we look up, and here's this adult bald eagle flies over. He didn't sit on the farm, but he flew over the boundaries,
That counted.
That counted. But you're right. You know, you're sitting there and you're kind of thinking, all of a sudden you pick up a bird song, and you, like this morning, or no, it was yesterday when I was harrowing, resting the horses, and I said, oh, the yellow warbler's back, because I heard him singing in the woods. You know, this time of year especially, you know, every day there's new birds showing up, whether it's the swallows under the eaves or the first bull oriole, or, you know, because it's quiet, you can hear them.
Mm-hmm. And that's, for, you know, growing up in a bird watching family, I was never that big into bird watching until I stopped bird watching, really. Now, if you hear us as a kid, it's just because of what I was taught as a kid. You hear a song of a bird that is out of norm, you instantly pick it up. I might not know what it is, but I know that bird doesn't belong here, or that bird's just moving through. It's the little things that for me happened because I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a small family farm, and face it, a lot of it has to do with horse farming, because majority of our time as a family was spent working together. Mm-hmm. And those are where the best memories come from.
Right.
We took vacations. You know, we took different vacations. That isn't even in my top 25 memories growing up. Mm-hmm. My best memories are actually working together because it was a competition. Who could get it done the fastest? You know, mm-hmm. It's...
or you finish and you go play basketball or
absolutely.
Something like that.
Or if something went wrong, you know, and you had a little disaster, you know, nobody got hurt bad, but, you know, somebody falls off a pony. You know, I fell off the pony when I was, the pony ran for home and I fell off, and that story will continue to be retold and retold and retold. Well, that, you know, you wouldn't really say that's a fun time. You know, but you know, those are the memories that were created. And just like Brian asked me, you know, we covered up an arrowhead. I saw it and I couldn't get the rig stopped in time. And it was a nice long point. You know, I could tell. He said, how can you see that? And that's just something that we were, from ever since I can remember, you would always just be subconsciously looking for that specific shape of an arrowhead when you were out in the field. I don't think there's ever been a year since we lived here that I haven't found at least one in the mm-hmm. spring while working mm-hmm. with the harrow.
Mm-hmm.
I still can't believe I found one.
Better frame it.
Trust me, that is going to be on a very safe place.
Yeah.
So, no, go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, so far we've talked a lot about the family, the small family farm and the community. I guess one of the things I wanted to make sure we got into was decision making. And, you know, you guys have had you mentioned earlier, two very large decisions in moving farms from Ohio to Kansas and Kansas back to Ohio. And I think one of the perceptions is that the head of the household, Tim in this case, you know, from outside would be you are the primary decision maker, and what you decide is what is the, you know, that's the final decision, and you make that on your own. And I guess I wanted to kind of dispel that a little bit, that it is a family decision. It's not you making the decision on your own, and everybody else just has to listen.
It's actually exactly the opposite.
So it is normal.
Yep.
I'm sure every family's different.
Right.
I'm sure.
I'd like to make a comment, then I want her to give her side, but I tend to be a little overly optimistic. And so when we're discussing something of this nature, I will always be advocating all the potential positives. And so when we're discussing something, it's easy for me to get really caught up in it because I see the great potential on it. A few things come to mind that would apply for that, but then she views it from a more realistic and cautious approach about some of the other angles.
Well, you come up with a lot of ideas because you're very visionary, which is great. But as far as decision making for big decisions, we definitely discuss and look at it, try and look at it from all the angles, and decide together is what we do a lot. And maybe I wouldn't feel like I would have as much say in it if I wouldn't be as directly involved in the farm, maybe. Or even any decisions. We really do try and make them together.
And when it comes down to, the daily things, Katie takes care of all the bookwork. She's our accountant, so to speak. And as far as the cows and the calves, as far as out in the field, what I'm going to be planting or all of those decisions, we would discuss it, but, that's kind of my thing. But when it comes to cows, even which, if we use AI, which bulls we use, all of those things, Katie probably has as much input or more input as far as the cows do than I do, because she's, well, face it, women in a parlor.
Records.
I'm not a good record keeper, and she loves
I like
numbers.
looking at the records and looking at which cows were, which calves came out of which cow and all that, and seeing which ones are good and going with that. So I guess that's why.
And so that works really, really well. And because we both have, everybody can say this, we have strong traits that, and when you combine the two, it's just much stronger than each one individually.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess I just wanted to ask that question, like I was saying earlier, and I know you're speaking of your family dynamic, and every farm is different, as you mentioned, but that, is part of the reason why we do these recordings or these podcasts is that we want to basically show that the Plain community is same thing as everybody else. It's not, because like I said, the outside view is that the man is the head of the household and he makes the decisions, and that's just the way it goes. And so I guess that's why I wanted to bring up that question.
I think I could honestly say that I would know of, I'm sure there are instances, but by and large, there would be very few people that would just be, a tyrant and the wife is a slave. And, Katie has made the comment in the past that, she would feel like she's so much more liberated than most other people can feel, because she's not pressured to go out and get a substantial off-farm job or, generate her own income. She's got that luxury of just being here at home and taking care of the children, growing the garden, and just, it's to the point where if we don't see each other much for a day, it's, like, wow, what happened? You're so used to it. So I don't think there are very few women in this community. There's cases like there's everywhere, regardless of what religion you are, where the woman is probably oppressed and suppressed and depressed. But by and large, I would say that they are always side by side on most things.
And Brian, I think we see that a lot. It seems like the husband is usually more of the spokesperson of the couple, but I can't tell you how many times in working with different Amish farmers that, well, he needs to talk to the wife about this before he says yes and all this. But Brian and I have a very unique job in that we get to see that. So what we're trying to do is, because the Plain community women aren't generally in the forefront with talking about
we have
their
no desire
role.
To be.
And so, but what we're trying to do is get people to understand that maybe not as at the forefront, but the decision making lays at least 50% on the wife.
Especially as the children get older, and I really notice this, as they come home from school, I'll be outside doing something. The girls come home from school, they come into the house, and they blow up about their day. They carry on about what happened, good or bad. And so she gets the first hand, and then she'll bring it to me, if there's an issue, for example. But it's as the children, a lot of the children's conversations are not as much with me as they are with her. So she's the connection for me to see really what's going on, how their day went, because they get home from school about time we start chores.
So has, when you were growing up, both of you, as teenagers, and now with teenagers, has there been a huge shift in how teenagers are in the Plain community versus, or don't you want to go there?
You mean versus when we were
Yes.
teenagers?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just because of the technology, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad there wasn't that out there when we were teenagers. Really,
I'm just lucky it wasn't available.
no kidding. No kidding.
Well, the thing, if you look at Ryan, he's 18 and Aaron is 16. So they would be in that stage where the world
They like
calls
trying
it,
out new things.
they right now everything out there that the Plain community doesn't have looks attractive to them. It's appealing. So, they're dabbling in this and dabbling in that. But like especially Ryan and even Aaron, they do look forward to the day when they can be baptized in the church and be a member of the church. They both freely talk about that. That's all their intentions are. But at this point, they want to try out some of these things out
They want to
there.
go water skiing and they want to go ride four-wheelers or whatever, and just have what looks like a good time right now.
Mm-hmm. Now,
So.
because they're not members, the church is not involved in anything as far as telling them what they can and can't do. That is strictly falls on you two, right?
Yes. Yes, it does.
There's a huge difference from families. Well, I say huge. There's a large variation within the community as far as how their children are. Some people, their children would never drive a car, for example, and others will. So there's a certain degree of variation, and it falls on primarily the parents. Now, of course, every once in a while they have a child like Mike was, where they're just completely rebellious.
Really?
So, but what happens is, until they are baptized and a member of the church, they are not a part of it. Twice a year we have council meeting and communion church, and that's for only the baptized members. So there's things that they will still, if they do come to church, they respect and they look just like everybody else. But as far as doing some of these other things, it's not taboo for them.
Mm-hmm. And now there's a huge variation from family to family, like you said, but there's also a variation from denomination of Amish church to other denomination, correct?
That's right.
Like
That's right.
what the youth do. Like some of them, the youth would not be allowed to play organized sports, even if they're not a member of the church. It would
Correct.
It's not that they wouldn't be allowed; it would be frowned upon.
Mm-hmm.
And just a technicality, there is a certain age at when it's when they're done with school, correct, is when
Usually 16 is kind of the magic number.
Okay.
And I'd like to make mention some of the to try and explain how, among the Plain community, there's a lot of dating on a Saturday night. And I think that's always a little confusing to some people. And where that really started was initially this community was really spread out. And everybody was on a farm. So the distance to the girlfriend's house might have been 20 miles. Well, on a farm, it was a 6-day-a-week job. So late Saturday, typically on Saturday, we don't try and do anything major, or we kind of finish things up so that we can do a few extra things so we don't have as many things to do on Sunday. So then the boy would hit the road with his horse, and he might travel 20 miles, then he stays overnight. And then late Sunday night, he comes home for another week of working on the farm. So that's where that kind of started. And then it just one of those things that just kind of continued to progress. But as a rule, I would say the large majority would be baptized in that 19 to 21 range, I'm going to say. There's going to be, of course, extreme cases either way, but by and large, that would be. And, if you look at which the Old Order Amish are the largest group here in Ohio. And I think according to statistics, like just under 90% of all the young people will come back and become a member of the church.
And I think it's always interesting to me is watching that transition from about 16 to 19. At 16, they sometimes, they might not always go to church with you or things like that. And then all of a sudden you notice, oh, hey, he's coming or she's coming to church pretty much every time. She's paying a lot of attention, and you just notice the outer things. And they put things away, that they were used to having. And that's a really neat change to watch, is that accountability, maybe? Is that a good word for it? I'm not sure.
And they realize that, especially if they grow up in a nurturing family, that's what they desire as they get a little older, and they just have a desire to have that as they get older. And they, since we only go through 8 years of school, by the time they're 18 to 20, they've done a fair amount of things because they've had a job, and all of a sudden, they start looking at things a little differently and more. I think maybe become adults a little younger, maybe at times. Mm-hmm. But what bothers me, you asked about the kids these days, is there's so many non-farm growing up children with affluent parents and a lot of spare time. And they're not used to the responsibility. This thing that we can't emphasize enough about the family farm is learning children responsibility, whether it's feeding chickens, or, whether it's a 2-minute job, just the responsibility. And I just noticed that in kids nowadays, from the time they punch out Friday afternoon from their job until Monday morning, they're just like rudderless ship almost. They have no purpose, no point. And I view that almost a bigger negative as I do things.
Mm-hmm. Now, do the kids have an interest in, do you think as they get older, will they want their own farm? Do they want to keep farming here? Does it vary from one to the other?
Oh, we're having feuds about that already,
Ryan that's what he lives for.
But then
he wants to farm. He doesn't necessarily have to farm here, but the reality of it is, in this community, unless the economy or something goes the other direction, farmland, to be able to buy a farm on the market is just, it looks completely hopeless. Now, granted, that can all change, but so the home farm becomes a hot topic. Mm-hmm. It does. But I would say Erin, which is the oldest of the girls, would probably be the least desired
at this point.
But
I was exactly like her when I was a 16-year-old.
Yeah,
you had big dreams when you were that age.
I was not going to grow up or live on a farm when I was married.
Should we mention the 3 things that you always said?
I think goodness. You should.
Well, before I met her, she always said there's 3 things. She will not be Amish, she will not be on a farm, and she desires to live in Chicago.
In an apartment.
In an apartment, and struck out on all 3. So,
Katie, how would you look at living in Chicago in an apartment right now?
It would be torture. I'm much more independent this way. Oh, my.
But you see that so much in kids through their teenage years. They kind of fall away from their desire to farm because of it is really hindering their fun times.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what I think is great about farming is it gets you away from things you'd rather not be. But then as they get older and they start looking back on what it was like, that romance of farming comes back. Mm-hmm. Now, the romance of farming, I have seen these people start back up farming all excited, and all of a sudden about 6 months into it, of milking cows twice a day, the romance is gone, and the reality of this is a hard job, especially for a young couple like you were years ago with little kids. Mm-hmm. Once the kids start being able to help, it makes it a lot more enjoyable.
Right.
But I think you'll be shocked, because I never thought I would be working in the farming community when I was 17.
Mm-mm.
And the other thing that's becoming difficult, if a boy meets his future wife, and she comes from multiple generations non-farming background, and used to being able to go places, and we have supper at 5 o'clock, and all of a sudden then you have an occasion. I can think of a couple right off the top of my head that just got into the farming situation and just flourished like a duck to water, even though the wives had no farming background. They loved that. Her husband wasn't getting into a work truck at 5 in the morning and coming home 12 hours later. Even though the workload sometimes is overwhelming, the overall concept they've embraced. But without that, and the husband doesn't have the support of his wife, and then having to be out there at long hours trying to get things done, and then coming back into the house and being asked what took so long, because she doesn't understand what is involved in the caretaking of a farm. I get asked this all the time. So are you done? No, we just quit. On a farm, there's always something to do. And we actually had this conversation here in the last couple of weeks, trying to make an effort of not working till dark every night. Because we enjoy doing the little, we call it piddle stuff in the evening, the little cleanup here, mowing a few poison hemlocks there. We enjoy doing that in the evening, but if we're not careful, all of a sudden the days get too long and we kind of lose touch with each other. So you actually have to make an effort not to do that. But that's partly because we enjoy it too.
Mm-hmm. I remember Mom saying, what was it? A man's work is from dusk till dawn and a woman's work is never done. I don't know how many times Mom would say that.
Her other favorite was, it's better to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt.
Your mom's a wise woman.
Yes. But I think talking about the support of the wife in the farming operation, I don't think that is even the key in the Plain community. The people that have businesses that are not in the farming sector, but that whole support of the wife is paramount in any marriage and in any operation, wherever you're in. If you see a very successful man, there is support coming from the wife along the way usually. And you see that farms that struggle, there might not quite be that 50-50 sharing going on. And it's to have both people involved on the same page is going to make everything flourish, from kids to the farm to the community.
And all of even the non-farming businesses in the Plain communities usually started out as a one-horse operation, and they grew. And so it was important for the wife maybe to be out there. Let's say it was a wood shop, and maybe she was running something through the planer just to help. But it's vital.
Well, Tim and Katie, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. It was really interesting to get a perspective of an Amish couple talking with you two about the family and the farm and everything that goes into it, and your story about your moves and everything. It's really cool to hear it. And even though I'm family, hearing it this way really brought up some nuances that I had forgotten about. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.